Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another episode of DevRelish. For those of you who haven't watched this show before, obviously it's about developer relations, but also the ish is like all those jobs that are DevRel related, but may not have a DevRel title. So we kind of want to cover that whole DevRel umbrella, however you want to define it. So I'm Brian. My co-host is Erin here. And we're joined by Mary Thengvall, who I'm really excited to have because Mary, you've been kind of the most active person in the DevRel community space. Like you wrote a book, you do the newsletter, and I think you started the DevRel Collective, didn't you?
I was
or you were
part of the
starting?
group. Yeah. There were a few of us hanging out at a conference who went, okay, hang on. There's like 5 of us that always gravitate toward each other at conferences. Can we talk outside of conferences? Because we need that support more often.
Yes,
Yeah.
I totally understand that. So, and for those listening who might not know about that Slack, so it's the DevRel Collective Slack, which is basically you have to be a DevRel professional already. Not like I'm seeking a job as DevRel. You have to be actively working as a DevRel to be able to join the Slack, and it's a very active, it's very active, very supportive. Also, it's got the best jobs board for DevRel folks that I know
a
of.
really active recruiting channel. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and I think as someone who pivoted into DevRel after various things on accidentally DevRel'd, it was a great place for me to be like, oh, I'm not losing it. This is how it is when it's more like, this is an ish. Do I do this? Is this part of my job? I don't know what I'm doing. It's like, wow, this is a collective sentiment here. I feel heard and validated.
Yes. Well, and one of my favorite people in the developer community space is Amy Hermes, and she loves to tell the story of how we met because I was literally listening to a podcast episode that she was a guest on with some good friends of mine going, hang on, she does what I do, but she does exactly what I do. Wait, I've never heard anyone else say exactly what I do. And I reached out to her via Twitter DM and basically said that. And so when you can find those people where you're like, wait, hang on, you get this, you understand, like, this is solidly in the ish category, but it's what we do and everybody else is doing it too. Like it's the best feeling. It's so good.
Super. Yeah. So thank you so much for all the work that you do putting into that and moderation. I know that's a lot of work.
Oh God, yeah. That community is huge now. Like it's like what? It's like a few thousand people or something?
It's ridiculous. Like it legit started with 5 of us. And these days, someone said the other day, it was at like 2,500, almost 2,700. Like it's ludicrous. And luckily, like I'm actually a little bit removed from the admin side of things there these days. We have a fantastic group of what we call benevolent dictators. And so great group of people who are really running the show over there. And I'm kind of there as a advisor and hanging out in the background here and there. But yeah, it's grown into a really great community, which is fantastic.
Yeah, it is a great community. And the number you like saying there's like 2,500 people in there is just shocking to me as somebody who's been doing DevRel for I started like 12, 13 years ago, I guess it is now. I'm losing track. And I could practically name everybody who was doing DevRel back then. It wasn't.
You can count on one hand. Yeah.
So
exactly. Yeah.
Which actually kind of gets us to a little bit of where we want to go with the conversation. But before we talk about kind of trends you've seen in DevRel, given all of your involvement in it, I want to talk a little bit about how did you get into DevRel? Like what drew you to DevRel? Like what was your career path into there?
It was very much what Erin said about I kind of accidentally stumbled into it and someone said, cool, go do this. And I went, okay, I guess I'm doing that now. So I actually have a journalism background and when I graduated from university was the same like 6-month period that all of the newspapers were laying off all of their writing staff because everyone was turning to news online. And so I wound up in the public relations department at O'Reilly Media writing press releases because it was similar enough to the journalism skills that I had that I kind of went, okay, that'll work for now. It's a job. Let the economy settle out and let's see what happens and what comes from that. And having that journalism background, I was very passionate about, like, I don't want to write about things that I don't know. So I need to go research these things, which was everything from like, I don't know, what is Hadoop and why are these animals on the book covers? And what are these different programming languages? And how do I understand what I'm writing a press release about? And why do people care about these things? And all of that. And in the midst of learning all of those things, I got to know a lot of the people who were reading the books and attending the conferences and started asking a lot of questions about like, hey, how are we defining what books we're writing next? What topics are at the conferences? What conferences we host? And the more that I asked those questions, the more people internally kind of went, well, we've got, you know, the editors who are out in the communities and the conference chairs who are out in the communities. I'm like, great, but do we have people who have that holistic picture rather than it just being, well, I focus on this, you know, little niche of this industry and I focus over here and those types of things. And I like to say I basically asked enough questions and annoyed enough people as the like 25-year-old on staff that someone finally went, fine, go do that thing. And so I wound up finding myself reporting to our CEO, who was Laura Baldwin. And she was like, here's your budget for the year. You report to me. What title do you want? Figure out what you want to do. Go get the answers to those questions. And then we'll evaluate it at the end of the year and see if this is something we should actually do. And I was like, cool, thanks. What? And so I called up the like 3 other people that I knew who kind of did similar things and went, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Help. And so I legit like hit the road and traveled and talked to people and would spend like a week in New York and then go spend 3 days in Boston and then go spend a couple days in Philly and like go through our database of reviewers and conference speakers and authors and be like, hi, I'm going to be here. Can I treat you to coffee? Can I treat you to lunch? Can we go out for drinks? And would just sit down with my little notebook and literally just sit there and like listen and take notes on everything. And then on my flights home, I'd go, okay, hang on. This person said this. These people did that. Yes.
I'm like laughing because this is my current desktop because there was an engineering demo at All Hands today. So yep, that's my 100%. With all the conference stickers on the back.
Yes. And I still have that pile of notebooks at home because I can't get myself.
Oh no, those are gold. Like that's like you're never. Like, I
never go back to them, but I'm also not ever getting rid of them. But then I would
like my CD collection.
Exactly. Yeah.
The CD collection, the box of wires that is also just off camera down here that I don't know where half of them go to, but
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Whatsoever. Yeah. But yeah, so I'd take that feedback and that information about, hey, you know, where are you getting information? What blogs are you looking at? What trends do you see? And write up a report and send that around to the relevant editors and conference chairs. And that would then at times be used to define like, what topics are we doing next? And what are we looking at? And who are we getting to speak at conferences and things like that? And so that kind of got me into this whole like, oh, we're kind of building a community around this, but I'm listening to them. I'm getting feedback from them. And other people are now understanding that feedback is incredibly helpful. And so that's kind of how I stumbled into the whole like community management, developer relations space without really knowing that it was a space or that a thing was building out of that. And then since then, I've worked for a handful of different companies, working with their developer audiences, people. Why did I lose what the word was there? Communities, people who use their software. But then also I took a couple years off, 2017 to 2019, and ran my own consulting company, because as I was working for these different companies, I was answering the same exact questions that I've been answering for years. My friends were all answering the same questions they had all been answering for years. Teams were getting laid off with no notice because they couldn't answer some of those questions or weren't given the opportunity to answer those questions, right? And honestly, I just got tired of constantly fighting for, like, this is why we should exist. And so instead of continuing to fight that on a one-on-one basis, I went, no, screw it. I'm going to found my own consulting firm. I'm going to produce content that's going to help other people answer the questions that I wish I had resources around when I was getting started. I'm going to talk to a variety of companies. I'm going to build up this portfolio of people that I've worked with. And in doing so, really try to help not only myself for future jobs, but also everyone else have more of that foundation to lean on to say, no, hang on. Here's the things that we do. Here's why we exist. Here's how we can make your company, your product, whatever it is, different from others. Here's the distinguishing factors. Here's the value that we really bring to the table. And so I think to this day, I still struggle with people being like, oh, but you're the expert. And I'm like, no. I just learned from all of the mistakes that we all made and that I made multiple times. And I was determined enough to get the answers out there so that other people don't have to. So, like, I'm still learning every day. But it's just, there's a few of us, like you were saying, Brian, who have been involved with us for long enough to go, oh, hang on, we're all doing this and we really shouldn't be. Can we fix that somehow?
Yeah.
So that we can break that cycle.
I know some of those common questions, like, how do you measure DevRel?
Right.
Oh my God! If I had $1 for every time that was brought up on the slide,
you could retire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
exactly.
I mean,
but
I
wanted to.
I was just laughing because I was like, the whole thing is like, that was literally when you were creating your content in your consultancy when I entered into it. So thank you, because you're definitely the Google that I came up and I was like, what is my job title? What do I do? But I mean, the whole question still answered. That was literally what I had to give a presentation today on All Hands was, why is Erin going to all these conferences and what
yes.
So
yes.
what?
Right.
Yeah.
So which brings me to you then wrote the book that answers that question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your book.
Sure. So insider story on writing that book. It was not supposed to be just me writing it. We actually started with 4 of us, and it started as a conversation at a conference, right? So there was an editor there, Louise, who's brilliant and fantastic, and now actually works for O'Reilly, who had pulled aside a few people at a big dinner we had all pulled together. Was like, hey, what topic should we be writing about next? And Julie Gunderson was like, DevRel. There's nothing on DevRel. We need something on DevRel. Like, there's stuff on community, but we need to fill this gap. And so Louise was like, great, you'll write it. And Julie was like, no, but I'll write it with other people. And so she pulled in Jason Yee and then Nathan Harvey. And then I don't remember which one of the 3 of them said, oh, and Mary could do this too. And Louise was like, great, the 4 of you will write this book. Let's get a proposal together. And Nathan Harvey literally walked behind me, pats me on the shoulder and goes, I'm so excited to work on this with you, and walks away. And I was like, What are we working on together? I have no idea what you're talking about. But the awesome thing was that between the 4 of us, we kind of sat down and did a big brainstorming session around what topics do we need to cover? What questions do we know we have to answer? What are the common things that there aren't scads of blog posts about already, right? And by the time we did that brain dump and then kind of went through and went, okay, these kind of go into this category and this goes here, that was the point at which everyone else kind of started going, oh, hang on, I have this going on in my personal life. I have this going on with work. I don't actually think I have the time to do this. And I went, okay, well, I have the outline. I have, at that time, the company that I was working for had given me their blessing to take 1 day a week to write. So I was like, maybe I can figure this out. Like, as long as I can rely on the three of you for a lot of, feedback and questions along the way. And am I going about this in the right way and all of that? And they agreed and supported me wholeheartedly the entire way, which was fantastic. I could not have done it without them. But yeah, so little insider scoop on how that book came to be. But it was really lessons learned and things that we all had struggled with a lot when we were getting started. And again, really wanted to get out there in a way that was understandable, not only for people who were active practitioners and individual contributors doing this job on a day-to-day basis, but also something that they could hand to their managers and be like, look, I know you don't understand what I'm doing. I know you don't necessarily want to sit and get a lecture from me on a weekly basis. Do you like to read? You can read this instead. Like, here's third-party information, right? Which, for whatever reason, leaders tend to listen to people outside of the company more. So like, it gives you not only something that you can use to back up what you're doing, but also a resource that you can give to management to hopefully read through and better understand what's going on, so that you aren't having to answer those questions yourself day after day, week after week. It's incredibly overwhelming at times, but also I'm so grateful that we accomplished that goal, because I still, it's 5 years later, almost 5 years later, and I still have people coming up to me being like, okay, I read this again and this all still fits and it works really well. And this is what I learned this time when I read it. I'm like, okay, good. Because I very much wrote it with the hope that selfishly I wouldn't have to write it again in 2 years. And so like, didn't mention a lot of tools, didn't specifically, name drop things, but it was a lot of the theory and practice and here's the questions to ask, which makes me laugh because A-Press reached out earlier this week and they were like, hey, you want to write a second edition? And I was like, nope. Thanks for asking. Yeah. Cool.
I know that feeling. The first time I wrote a book, I was like, I'm never going to do this again. And then I got convinced to do it a second one. And I'm like, I'm absolutely never going to do it again.
No.
So yeah,
it's definitely a labor of love.
Understand. Yeah. It's not a moneymaker, that's for sure.
And I had someone one time tell me, like, if you have to write a book, do it. If it's it sounds like that might be fun, it might be something I want to do someday, like, no. But it's definitely, it's enjoyable at times. It's a lot of hard work at times. It requires a lot of support and encouragement from people around you. But I wouldn't have changed that. I'm glad that it's out there. I'm glad that it's been so helpful. It's so incredibly rewarding to hear that people use it and continue to use it, and that it's helped make a difference. And that was the sole goal that I had. So I'm glad that it's doing that.
Great. Yeah. And sorry, you were going to say something, Erin? Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just like, that's great. Because like, I do the NaNoWriMo and like, I think I've completed it twice. And like, it's
hard.
It's like, and yet it's not quality content. Like, coming from a journalism background, I'm going, ooh, there was some, I just have to hit the damn 50,000 words limit days.
100%. 100%.
Yeah. Now you can just use ChatGPT, spit it out.
Come on. Yeah. Come on. It's perfect. I mean, we were playing with Google Bard yesterday and it didn't know there was an E in ketchup. So there's your fun fact. Yeah. There you go. Yeah.
I have questions.
Yeah. If you ask it, does ketchup have an E in it? It did not pick it up. So there you go.
Fascinating. Okay.
Right? I was like, what? Out of all the things you didn't get, Google?
Right.
There's examples of it thinking 2 + 2 is 5 and making an argument that 2 + 2 is 5. Not Bard, all of them. Yeah. So
come on.
Not perfect.
Guys, you're spared from the robot. I'm like, honestly, can you guys like learn to do these tasks that I don't want to do? Paying my taxes, doing my taxes, mess.
Sure.
Claiming, doing insurance-y, calling my healthcare provider. We train robots for that stuff.
Train it for the executive function things. If you can take all of that off my plate.
Yeah.
Cool.
Reminders, follows up, please just handle it, please.
Yes, absolutely.
Make dinner, to do my laundry.
Bonus
points.
Yeah, the folding. Oh my God, the folding. Yes, please. Can we get robots to do the folding?
Yeah, come on, robots, faster now. But I think in this next phase of things, like, where do you see as, like, it's gone through a couple waves because you've been in it, you've seen a couple waves, you've written a book on it. What is the biggest thing that you're like, wow, I did not see that one coming, or something that you did expect that was like, ooh, really missed the mark there, that is different throughout the years?
That's a great question. I think one of the most interesting things that I saw was, around the time that I wrote the book was when everyone was starting to say, oh, we need a developer advocate. And you'd be like, great, why? And they'd go, well, because we need a developer advocate. And you're like, cool. What are they going to do? Be a developer advocate? You're like, okay, you don't understand what you're asking for. You don't understand why you need it, right? None of that is represented in this desire. And so that was not unexpected, but I think we started to get more of that information out there. And then like mid-pandemic / post-pandemic, like middle of like 2021 and then into 2022, there were so many jobs available. Like, the newsletter that I do, I have a rolling job board that we keep. And I want to say we had upwards of like 3,000 jobs on there, or something stupid at one point. And I was like, hang on, how long are we keeping these on here for? And it was like 3 months at a time. And like, okay, no, this is ridiculous. Like, it just absolutely exploded. And you still had some of them that were like, we need a dev advocate to write content and answer support for questions and take care of our forum and build a community and speak at all the conferences and get us to be known in the entire industry. And you're like, okay, you still don't completely understand what you're asking for. But there were also a lot of companies that really knew, like, there were solid job descriptions out there. And it was an overwhelming number of companies looking for developer relations professionals. Obviously, we've seen that go down since the economy changed. There's still, I think, more than I would have expected previously. But it's been a fascinating, I think, turn as we've seen some of the trends around when companies are integrating developer relations, where so many of them now are starting to say, look, we have 8 people at the company and we want to officially launch our project or product in 6 months. We need a DevRel person here now. It's like, okay, cool. Like, you might not know exactly why, and you might not have a fully defined what their day-to-day role is going to look like, but companies are really starting to understand we need someone in here early to make sure that the developer experience is good, to make sure that we've got a strong relationship with the companies that are trying this out, with our early users. And to see that starting so early in the startup process now, I think has been really rewarding, because I think a lot of companies are finally starting to see, like, this is how we differentiate ourselves. This is how we make sure that the community sees that we're serious about getting feedback, that we're serious about listening to them. And it doesn't always work, right? There's trial and error, like there always has been. But I think that's been one of the most interesting things that I've seen, is that change from like, oh no, we can't do community stuff until we've got, 100 people in the company, or until the community is big enough that we need someone managing it, or things like that, to like, no, we need you here to actually work on that and start to build that, which has been, I think, really, really good.
Yeah, I've seen that too. Like, in fact, I joined a couple of companies for over the pandemic I was their first DevRel, and they were super small. In fact, right now, I'd say when I see the stuff come through, what jobs are open and kind of, and it seems like those are the people actually right now. Everybody who's big is shrinking. and they're shrinking their DevRel teams, but it's the small companies that have their seed money or Series A, and they're like, they really need to grow fast, and they're like, those are the ones that are hiring right now.
Absolutely.
And I think the other thing I've noticed, at least in my time doing it and coming like the 5 or 6 years part, like the adoption and integration of product on teams is only more and more happening. Cause like I came through the route of being a product manager and thought I'm a media product manager. That's what I went to grad school for. Just kidding.
Sure.
Did not do that. But like now I joke that part of my most valuable part of my job at the last 2 roles that I've held has been breaking the product. Like I'm the first person to break it.
Yes.
Which is great for product. And I don't think like companies seem more receptive to that ever before. Like I think there's definitely been times in the past where I've been like, maybe we should think about this product. And like, no, you're in community or DevRel. You don't get to give feedback on product. And now it's like, can you please come to our product meetings? Can you talk more about product? Can you help us figure out what the next product is? And I think that's a very welcome thing. But again, for many, it requires a different skill set, and a community or product focused DevRel is different than like, say, an education focused DevRel at times.
Sure. Or an awareness focused DevRel, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's having that seat at the table is something that I've seen a lot more, where, you know, the first couple organizations that I was with, like O'Reilly, I think was a different beast because I was defining the role as I did it, which felt like you're building a car as you're driving, which is not a good thing. But the couple companies after that, it was difficult because I was, you know, an individual contributor reporting to a manager who reported to a director, who reported to a VP, who reported to a C-suite person. And so it was like, by the time I gave feedback about what I was hearing, it had to go through 5 other people before someone was like, oh, hang on. Yeah, maybe we should do that thing. Which rarely happened, right? Where now people are like, oh, hang on. Okay, Devro, what are you hearing from community? What are you seeing in the forums? What pattern are you noticing? What additional items are you interested in? And so I feel like we're given that ability to, or given the space and the time to give more of that feedback. And when we are giving that feedback, then it's better received than it has been in the past. And you still might have to struggle with the, like, how do I get this prioritized properly or things like that, but it's at least heard and received a little bit more, which is good.
Yeah.
I still don't ever feel like there's enough time in the days.
I brought up Rizelle's comment about she doesn't know what her focus is, because I don't think I've ever really had a focus. I've always said, like, my feeling, and having been in a lot of different places, is when it's done right, it's a two-way street. It's not just like when folks want DevRel just to be like out there blasting their message. It's like, it's just, it doesn't work right. I mean, you got to do for the community to get from the community. And it's like, you know, so, you know, and also because the DevRel is often, like, to Erin's point, the first person to break stuff, but also like the one who's talking to people who are like having those problems. They're talking to developers who are using the product, and you can come back and you're like, hey, they're telling me this and they're telling me that. And so the companies that aren't as receptive to that inbound stuff from DevRel, I think, are losing out a lot of the value of it.
Yes. And when I was consulting, that was one of the questions that came up really often, was like, okay, what should our split between, you know, engaging with people internally and engaging with users externally be? And I was like 50-50. People are like, no, but I can't do that. I'm not doing my job effectively. And I'm like, cool. But if you're not engaging with people internally as much as you are your community members, your users, your customers externally, how do those internal people know what you're doing? How do you show them that that's valuable? How do you communicate to them what you're hearing from people externally, right? And so I still maintain that needs to be 50-50. You have to be representing the company. You have to be representing the community, but you need to be able to do both of those. And I agree, Brian, with what you were saying around, like, I don't know if I've ever had a very specific, this is the only thing that I'm responsible for. I have kind of triangle view of things that I put out a couple of years ago, where, you know, the three primary things that I see that we're focused on are awareness, enablement, and engagement. So do people know that we exist, that our product can be out there and help, and that we're here and can help? Are people able to use the product? Are they enabled to get started? Are they enabled to contribute? Are they enabled to be a part of the community? All of that. And then are people actually engaging with not only the product, but the community as well? And I think when you're a small team, you're doing bits and pieces from all three of those, right? There is no distinguishing between them. There's no saying, oh, I'm only focused on awareness. And it's interesting because, as Erin, as you said in chat, the organization grows, but then also as the program matures, I think that focus can shift and change. I had a really interesting experience last year with the team that I'm in charge of at Kamunda now, where, you know, we hit a point where our community is incredibly strong, which is something that I never take for granted. But we have a really strong community, but we're needing to, you know, expand into other communities, expand into other topics within tech. And so figuring out how much of my team's time should be focused on that expansion versus making sure that the onboarding experience is good, versus contributor experience being good, versus engaging with the people who are most engaged with us. Like, we had a team of 13, and even with that many people, we were constantly going, okay, hang on, where do we spend most of our time? How do we do all of these things we're being asked to do? Do we post generically about process automation? Do we post specific, you know, deep dives into this part of the component for this particular, you know, group of people who are using this thing on a day-to-day basis? And we wound up splitting the team up. And it was like, that was something that I asked for. I asked for additional focus. I asked for, you know, hey, do we need to be working on all of these different things? Or, like, we've got a really strong product marketing team that is fairly technical compared to most product marketers that I've known. Can we move the awareness branch over to them and maybe take one of the dev advocates and move them over there? They're more interested in that high level technical side of things that might bring people in and get them more interested in the product in the future, but it's not the deep dive, here's how you do X with Kamunda kind of a deal. We moved developer experience over to the engineering team because they were far more focused on the working with those engineering teams on documentation and the onboarding experience and things like that. And so the team now is 6 of us, but we are far more focused on the, like, how can we make things better for the people who intend to use Kamunda in production or are using Kamunda in production. So that's the, you know, enablement side of things. So a lot of that feedback, a lot of the, you know, hey, we're still sponsoring events, but we tend to sponsor events where people already know us rather than focusing more on the top of funnel awareness side of things. And then engaging with and keeping those most engaged community members interested in giving back, interested in our products, interested in learning more. And that reduced focus has been huge for the team as far as, like, we know what we're working on. We know what our goals are. We know where we're focused. And so being able to have that, even though it's a smaller team, has been fascinating to me, because I think so often we go, oh, well, but we need more people. We need a bigger team. We need to be able to, you know, serve more people and help more people with a bigger team. And it's like, well, yes, that can be helpful, but if we aren't reducing that focus, if we're continuing with the huge amount of things that we're doing, doesn't matter how big your team is, there's always going to be things that we're dropping because there's always more that you could do.
Absolutely.
The triangle, I think, is something I've definitely relied on a lot. And that's actually how, like, a lot of our tasks are structured that you read about. It's like, awesome. We think about it, but it does, like, it provides a hierarchy of, you know, I know on our team, we're a team of 2. I report directly to the head of community, and then we work very, like, cross-functionally. So we're technically under marketing, but work with engineering a lot. So like, my day is very much, before this, I was messaging some of our front-end engineers being like, people are struggling with our front end. Let's figure it out. And I think that's, the context switching is so important, but having that in a that focus allows me to know, okay, if I don't get something done, because it feels like there's always something I'm not getting done at the end of the week. I have no idea where the day goes.
Yep.
What gets dropped?
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. The meeting that I was in immediately before this, we were just talking through that of like, okay, our community summit was last week, and the entire team this week is like, who am I? What am I doing? What are my priorities this quarter? How are we halfway done with the quarter? Like, what is happening? And so taking that beat to go, okay, stop for a second. What did I initially say I wanted to get done this quarter? Is that still realistic based on all of the interrupt-driven tasks that happen in the weeks leading up to Summit? And if it's not realistic anymore, that's fine. But let's redefine what that looks like for the second half of the quarter so that we don't have that pile of 20 different things staring us in the face every morning and keeping us from being able to focus because we're so intimidated by those 20 things, right? Yeah. So taking that time to reevaluate and be more realistic rather than the, well, I got to get all 20 of these things done in the next 6 weeks. So I'm going to work 60-hour weeks to make that happen. Like, no.
Yeah.
We had to reprioritize to make the other things happen before Summit. That means we need to reprioritize what's happening now in order to be able to focus on what are the most important things to hit our actual goals.
Well, and I think
totally feeling that because I went through the same thing. I was out last week at a big meeting, and now I'm like, okay, what was I work? What did I need to get done?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And I love this question that Julia Seidman put up in the chat. Apologies if I pronounced that wrong. But one of the things that I absolutely love, and like she writes about, do you think that metrics can help ICs in that regard? And like, yes, but also in my thoughts, like I worked at a community analytics company previously. Yeah. So we actually were rethinking, okay, Twitter is down. What is the metrics that are important to us if this is moved? And so we've been thinking a lot about that and actually having a lot of conversations with that internally. Mm-hmm. And especially with how these like social platforms are changing, like Mastodon, it was actually huge for us when we went to PyCon and PyData, like everybody was on Mastodon, which is awesome, but that's a very different tracking. So we started to think about it in terms of collaborations. And so if you're thinking about DevRel in terms of collaboration, it also means that one of the things that I've had to learn, and like I'm very fortunate to have a manager who has kind of told me like, don't kill yourself, don't burn yourself out, stop.
Good.
And so thank you. Thanks, Chris, for doing all this. But one of the things that has been really helpful is like remembering that means thinking on your feet and spontaneity. And how do you get the time? Like, what are your tips to like managing when you're context switching or even taking that time off? Because if I'm not free to drop and go to a thing at times, I've now lost an opportunity that could have been a really big one for us.
Sure. So one of the things that I do with my team, we actually just rolled this out a couple weeks ago, and we're still figuring out some of the nuances, but that's beside the point. But I did this both because my team needed help with that prioritization process and also because I wanted to dig into our product more. So Kamunda is a process automation, process orchestration tool, but it also has decision tables that you can put in there. And so I created a decision table and then a process model that kind of walks through like, okay, we get a request from somebody. How do we evaluate that request? Like, does it directly impact one of our primary goals for this quarter, this year? Yes or no? If no, that automatically puts it into a like, well, should I actually be doing this thing, right? Like if it can't further one of those major goals, it takes a back seat usually. If it does hit one of those goals, but it's, this has to be done this week, next week, this month kind of a deal, again, it goes into that like, okay, is this actually a higher priority than the other things that I've already established are high priorities right now? Yes or no? And sometimes the answer is going to be yes. And then you have to drop one of those higher priority items. But it's helped us think through that like interrupt driven work a little bit more in the sense of, everything that pops up within the 2 weeks before the conference, obviously, unless it's a really out there, like we should do this completely new thing, let's implement it now, is going to need to get done because the conference is happening in 2 weeks. But other stuff, you can actually sit down and think like, oh, well, is this going to help benefit these 3 goals that we're working toward? Yes or no? And then use that to evaluate what should I actually be dropping. And I think, Julie, with regard to your question around metrics, for me with metrics, there are so many different things that you can collect, right? With the community metrics platforms, community engagement platforms that are out there these days, one of the things that me and my team have been struggling with lately is like, okay, hang on, there's so much data. How do we actually parse this data? What do we do with it to make it useful to us and help us understand it more? And so there's a lot of things that we're tracking, but I'm often not reporting on those number metrics. I'm using those to sit there and go, okay, hang on. Last week, we had this percentage of people reach this stage of onboarding in our product. This week, we had double that. Like, that's great, but why? Like, I care far more about the what happened, what impacted that, than I do that actual number. Like, that actual number is fantastic, but also if that actual number is only going to last in that higher range for 2 weeks, like, cool, that's a great anomaly and something that I want to reference, but I want to know why that happened, because if we can duplicate that, that's what really matters. And if it's, hey, that spiked because of the minor launch or minor release that we had mid-April, like, okay, we're not going to be duplicating that every week. Let's move on to other things. And so I tend to focus not just on the numbers, but far more of the what is happening, why is it happening, is that something that we can replicate in the future, yes or no? And then I do the strict numbers and graphs and things like that.
I think all of this is super important because it's always been a hard thing to measure. Number one, I think that some of the tools that are out now give that, a little bit, help a little bit to do that. But also I find in the many years I've been doing this, that at times when times are good, nobody cares about, like, it doesn't matter that you can't measure it that well. All of a sudden it's like, we just need, all your outreach is just like, oh, it's all we care. Like, and you can come to them with, we did this many blog posts, this many conferences, and everybody's like, great, that's awesome. You're all doing great work. And all of a sudden when things start getting tough, like now, it's like, if you come to them with those metrics, they're like, that's all great, but why do I care? Like, what does that mean for us?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's part of the reason why I try to not make our goals based on work output. Because if the goal is, hey, you've spoken at 5 conferences this quarter, it's like, well, what's the quality of the talk? Are those the right conferences that I should actually be at? What happens if I send out 10 CFPs and none of them get accepted for some reason? Like, is my goal totally screwed? Like, I'm not in control of whether or not that actually happens. And the same with blog posts. Like, if the goal is every Friday there's a technical blog technical blog post on the blog, like, cool. What's the quality have to be? What are we looking at as far as topics go? Is the topic actually one that's going to resonate with the audience? Or if we don't have one that fits that criteria, is it better to just skip? Like, are there people actually hitting the blog post at 9 a.m. every Friday expecting a technical blog to be up there? If they're not, then let's go for quality over quantity. Let's go for quality over a set schedule.
Dang it, Mary, so you just ruined my plan to chat GPT all the next week of my content.
And here's the thing, if chat GPT is helping and getting that like blank page syndrome out of the way, fantastic. But I think there's a huge piece of it that we still have to make sure that we're putting out content that people actually want, right? Julia, I think you mentioned that earlier too, right? That you have to be aware of, what are people looking for? What are people actually engaged with? What's actually going to be helpful? Or else you start creating content that no one needs, no one really cares about. And then, Brian, to your point, you can still get that praise for like, oh, great, you did 6 blog posts this month. who cares, right? What did they do? What did they actually accomplish? Versus, hey, here's the patterns that we're seeing in our forum. Everybody's asking these questions. Can we fix the documentation in this way? Let me submit a PR to see if that'll help. Can we write a blog post or record a video that shows how to do this a little bit better? Like, that might be the only piece of content that we get out this month. But if that makes a difference and solves that onboarding issue, fantastic.
Yep.
That's great, because then we can show, well, more people, either more people are successfully onboarding to the product, or that question isn't coming up as often.
Yep.
Right.
I think that's an excellent point, because it's something I've discussed many times in the past. It's just like, okay, but I can write, let's imagine I write a blog post. It's a kind of niche topic, but it's an important topic that matters a lot to some very valuable potential customers or existing customers.
Yeah.
That post is not going to get a lot of traffic. End of story. Like, there's just no way. I mean, it's not what it's designed for. But it still doesn't mean it's not a highly valuable thing. Sometimes that's more valuable than the post that got a ton of traffic, because if it landed us a couple customers, or it kept some customers from churning, huge wins there, as opposed to, like, if I got 10,000 people to come see my post that, like, we get no leads out of, kind of thing. So which is why it's so hard to measure, right? Like, because there's so many of these things, and it's like, well, depending on what the activity is and what the goal of that, even that I can write a blog post and my goal is awareness, or I write a blog post and my goal is to help, like, existing customers or whatever, like, the metrics change. And that's why I think it becomes so hard to measure on a consistent basis. And
absolutely.
It also, like, creates, like, being, again, self-taught, newer to the field. Like, I can distinctly, and you're saying that, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm so glad this is like therapy because, like, there was a tutorial that we were supposed to get out and we were behind on it. And I was like, and it was like, we found internal bugs, our product changed. It was like one of the most asked community questions. And it was like, great, I'm gonna write this tutorial. And like, I had to get help from my manager to kind of help me just throw it across the line. And it was no other reason, but, like, none of the stuff, we were like, oh, we found problems in our docs. We found, like, it was like, how much stuff did we find doing this one product that, like, yes, the community needs. And, like, yes, we could have just shipped it and it was a terrible tutorial that doesn't actually help you and not fixing all the other problems that we found.
Yes.
But for part of that reason, we're actually thinking about, and we're having the conversation pretty actively right now about input, output, and impact metrics. Like, when do we measure input? When do we measure output? And then when do we measure impact? And so, like, breaking it down in those three, like, is been a really helpful framework for me. And it's been like, even just if it's like in our Notion task Kanban board, it's just like, okay, what is the goal of this?
Yes.
And that's been a good, as an IC who needs that, it's a good gut check. Like,
well, and as a manager who is asked, hey, what was the impact of this thing? Like, that's helpful for me to have that too, right? I was talking to one of my advocates a few weeks ago, and we were talking through, how do we record, like, hey, I gave this feedback to this team. I filed a PR here for the documentation. I did, filed an issue for this particular community member in this place. Because it's not like, I don't want people to have to go in and create a task on the task board and then say, here's the link to this, and fill out the whole description and the business impact and everything. Like, no, for a thing that took you 2 minutes to do, why would you take 10 minutes to fill out the card and then link to it and then file the card as done? Like, let's not do that. But on the other hand, me as the manager being able to go to a single place and say, look, here's all of the feedback we've given the product team recently. Here's all of the PRs that we followed recently. Here's all of the issues that we filed on behalf of the community. Here's the impact that my team is having as a result of those conversations that are happening on a ad hoc basis with the community. That's gold. So, like, let's create a single card in Trello, which is what we use for our task board, that says this is the community feedback, or the things that we're doing as a result of that feedback, right? And then I just have a running list of things that I can reference. And it's 30 seconds longer than it would have taken you before, because you're posting a link to the PR in the Trello card. but it's a resource that we can reference as a team for those impact metrics directly, to be able to say, look, you don't have these connections, or if you do have those connections, maybe those people aren't reaching out to you as often, or those aren't the conversations that you're having. And so anytime we get that feedback of like, oh, well, technical marketing people could write that content, or product managers could have those conversations with customers, or whatever it is, you go, cool, but they're not. And here's what we're doing as a result, and here's the impact that we're having. And let's talk through, the relationships that you would lose if we were to leave, or the programs that simply wouldn't happen anymore because we don't have time for it. And then the customers that we would lose, or the sales opportunities that wouldn't have happened because you weren't in that location, right? And so while we might not always have those causation metrics of, we wrote this blog post, which got this many signups, which onboarded this many people as a direct result, right? We have a lot of that correlation, a lot of the impact, a lot of the, hey, we know when we do this thing, it can help in these ways, which I think is incredibly helpful.
Yeah. Oh my God. So I think we could have you on here for like,
I was gonna say, I'm just like
hours.
learning so much.
Seriously, I think this is all this is so good. I'm already like, I don't know if my manager's watching. I know he watches sometimes. I'm like, if he didn't watch, he's got to come back and watch, because there's so many things we could take out of, like, so many takeaways. I feel like, we're already running out of time, and we just, I feel like we have barely scratched the surface.
I love having this conversation, so we're good. I understand.
So, all right. So I unfortunately I will start to wrap things up, because we are running up to the hour, and I need to give Erin her time to give her pickle fact.
Yeah.
So Mary, you may not know. Yeah. This is like, so because we're DevRelish,
I love it.
and we have our little pickle there and everything.
I love it.
We have a pickle fact on every episode. So go ahead, Erin. Give us our pickle fact.
This is the really hard research that I do every time before this talk. So just letting you know, it's a lot of things. But in Russia, pickles juice is a common hangover cure. And so there you go, right? And some scientists have actually tested, like, is this like legit? Like, does this actually help solve a hangover? It is more effective than Gatorade when tested to beat a hangover, because it has more probiotics as well as large quantities of salt to replace dehydration. So there you go. Next time you're hungover, the pickleback was always a big thing.
Yes.
Maybe there was something to that. There's something. Not a scientist, but
not get hungover.
Let's just experiment time. Just kidding.
I love it.
We just, the way we relate this to DevRel is actually, we should just have conferences have pickle juice available after their party, right? Like,
yeah,
all the DevRel folks have to go to just instead of
last day of the conference should always just have
your throat
pickle juice.
Yeah,
I like it.
I love it.
All right.
Who's gonna sponsor? All right. Come on. Whose conference is taking this up?
Well, I think we have to do it. Be like, pickle juice brought to you by DevRel.
Yes, please do that. That's fantastic.
All right. Well, Mary, this was such a great conversation, and like, I feel like one day soon, we need to get you back on and almost continue it and keep going on this conversation. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, really, really grateful for you taking the time out to chat with us. And yeah, just love learning from you. So
thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right. So thanks everybody for tuning in. We will be back next month. We already kind of working on our next guest. So look for us. Be towards the end of June, because June is a kind of crazy month for me, but we will be back. So follow cfe.dev for any updates on DevRelish. Also, we have lots of really great virtual meetups coming up. It's just a lot of cool content. So please check it out. All right, we'll see you all next time.
Later.
Bye.